Welcome, dear listener, to a tale whispered from the quiet corners of the past, inviting you to rest and listen.
Welcome, dear listener. Some tales are too delicate for the bright light of day, preferring to conceal themselves beneath stone, behind linen, and within the deepest silence. Yet, as night descends, and the world grows weary of its facades, these stories stir to life. This is one such narrative, commencing not with a clamour or a name, but with the solemn toll of a bell, a sound that was never meant to break the quiet.
For centuries, this bell had stood silent, rusting and watching over the lost name of the convent, perhaps burned away, forgotten, or intentionally buried under layers of parchment and prayer. But then, during Lent, after midnight, when even shadows began to tire, the first ring pierced the stillness. A single, long, slow, and heavy chime echoed through the stone hallways, across the tranquil gardens, and into the locked cells where each sister slept, bound by a vow of silence older than her own voice. No one dared to speak, for speaking was strictly forbidden.
The following morning, a sister failed to awaken. She was discovered upright in the herb cellar, her hands meticulously folded, her lips unnaturally pale. There were no signs of ailment or struggle, only a tiny drop of blood at the corner of her mouth and a single strand of hair clutched in her fingers. Her passing was deemed a visitation, an act of divine mercy, but that was before the second bell. 19 nights later, at the same hour and with the same resonant tone, it rang again, and another sister died. Then another.
Though no one spoke, everyone began to listen with heightened intensity. The bell had transformed into a voice, speaking only when someone was destined to depart. One might expect suspicion to spread like smoke in such circumstances, but in a place constructed entirely upon silence, suspicion does not disseminate. It sinks. It plunges deep into the gut, into the spine, settling behind the eyes, where it observes ceaselessly, without a single blink.
Among the youngest sisters was Thérèse, who had entered the convent at the age of 12, not out of faith, but out of necessity, having nowhere else to go after her mother vanished in a flood and her father quickly remarried. Her stepmother, finding her eyes too expressive, sent her away to the mountain, to the silence, to God. Thérèse obeyed, bowed, and ceased speaking, yet her mind remained ceaselessly active. When the bell tolled for the 4th time, she began to meticulously count not merely days or deaths, but rather who was closest to the bell tower, who lit candles that week, who polished the brass, and who moved as if concealing a secret, even if no one dared to inquire.
Thérèse committed everything to memory, obsessively, for writing anything down was also forbidden. One night, while the other sisters knelt in prayer, their mouths still and their hearts rigid, Thérèse quietly slipped away. She ascended the stone stairs, past flickering oil lamps, and reached the tower. The bell itself was motionless, but its rope was warm, a warmth not from the wind, but from a recent touch. That night no one died, And in that moment she understood. The bell was not cursed, it was controlled. Someone was choosing, calling, judging, and the silence they had all sworn to uphold was being wielded as a cruel blade.
The following morning, Thérèse remained awake, waiting and watching. She meticulously began to track the order of daily duties: who tended the relics, who trimmed the ivy, who cleaned the altar cloths stained by ancient incense and older secrets. Her observations led her not to the tower, but to the kitchen, where she found the oldest sister, known as Anna. Anna had not uttered a word in 52 years. Her fingers were scarred from countless rosaries, and her eyes, grey like fog, seemed to have forgotten the feel of sunlight. She moved with a heavy grace, as if burdened by something far weightier than soup or bread.
Thérèse began to follow Anna, slowly and subtly, observing every movement, every pattern. She noticed Anna slept less than the others, often cleaned alone, and that her room was located closest to the bell staircase. Then, one night, hidden behind the vestry curtain, Thérèse witnessed it. Anna ascending the tower at midnight. Anna neither looked around nor hesitated. She placed one hand on the rope, the other on her chest, and pulled. Once, twice, 3 times. Below, a novice in the infirmary clutched her chest and was gone by morning.
Thérèse remained silent, waiting for something more profound, a discernible pattern. What she subsequently observed was not merely who rang the bell, but who perished. Each woman taken had subtly, almost imperceptibly, transgressed their vow. A sigh in sleep, a whispered memory, a cough that too closely resembled a word, and invariably, within days, the bell summoned them away. Thérèse began to comprehend. The bell was not a warning, but a punishment, and Sister Anna was its grim judge. She divulged her discovery to no one, but instead began to practice making sounds, not speaking, but humming softly under her blanket, coughing deliberately, and mouthing the names of those she had loved, lost, or would never again be permitted to utter.
On the 7th night the bell rang, yet no one died, for Thérèse had not yet been caught. So that very night she ascended to the tower, and, beside the rope, left something behind. Not a message, nor a threat, but a small cracked mirror, wrapped in the cloth of her novice veil. Her intention was for Anna to see herself, not as a sister or a saint, but as a woman who had chosen fear over mercy. However, Anna never looked into the mirror. She cast it into the fire, and the very next night she rang the bell once more.
Thérèse understood what had to be done. She waited until just before midnight, then entered the tower, where Anna already stood. Thérèse said nothing, but deliberately stepped between Anna and the rope. For the first time in 52 years, Anna blinked. Thérèse then raised her hand and whispered, "No." It was enough. Anna collapsed. The bell remained silent, and no one died that night. Yet Thérèse had broken her vow, and the others would surely know, leading to her banishment or worse. But she was prepared, for she had learned that silence is not peace. It can be a prison disguised as faith,
and in the wrong hands, a potent weapon.
The convent never again rang the bell. Anna was buried behind the chapel, and the following spring Therese departed without a farewell. For years thereafter, travellers on the old mountain path claimed to hear strange sounds in the wind, not screams or hymns, but the faintest hum of a girl's lullaby, a melody no one had taught her. For some voices are born from silence, and some stories only begin when someone dares to speak. Even if they whisper, even if no one listens, and even if no one rings the bell, yet it rings nonetheless.
For 3 days, Therese walked without food or water, accompanied only by the crunch of gravel beneath her bare feet and the lingering memory of a silent bell. She avoided the city, possessing neither coin nor papers, nor a recognizable name. Instead, she journeyed toward the forest, a place where, unlike the convent, there were no rules governing speech or memory. The trees demanded no penance, and the wind did not recoil from her breath. It was the first place in her life that truly felt sacred. For a long time, Therese remained silent, sleeping beneath roots, drinking from cold rivers, and listening in a way few others could comprehend. For having lived where breath itself was punished, she had learned to treat silence like a second skin.
Yet the silence of the forest was distinct. It did not threaten, but rather listened in return. One night, curled within the hollow of a cedar, she dreamed. In her dream, the bell rang once more, but this time its sound was not of iron, but of a voice, her own voice, calling out to someone she had never met, a girl younger than herself, draped in linen, silently mouthing prayers in a language long since forgotten.
Therese awoke with tears tracing her face, the kind that begin without conscious memory. In the convent, she had learned to weep silently, for even grief was forbidden expression. But here the leaves offered no judgment, and the earth inscribed no names into its ledger. She resumed her journey, not fleeing something, but moving towards an unknown destination, guided only by an inner resonance that had emerged only after she broke her vow. On the 7th day, she discovered an abandoned chapel, its roof caved in, ivy entwining through the cracks of its altar, and only the base remaining of its once proud bell tower.
Despite the ruin, small, fresh footprints were visible. Therese crouched, touching the earth, realizing someone, perhaps a girl, had been there. She waited, not in hiding, but simply breathing, allowing her presence to be felt rather than seen. That night, someone returned. She heard the rustle of feet, the scrape of stone, the quiet shiver of someone attempting to remain unheard, a sound she knew intimately. Slowly, Therese stepped out, offering no threat, uttering no word, only raising her hands, palms open, a gesture of peace learned long ago in a place that offered none.
The girl froze. No more than 13, with wide eyes, matted hair, and mismatched stolen clothes. On her neck, a faded but visible rope burn. Therese recognized not the girl herself, but the profound silence that clung to her, the same kind that resided in convents, a silence not chosen but carved into being. Therese approached gently, knelt, and without a word drew from her satchel the sole item she had kept, a shard of the broken mirror. She placed it on the ground and pushed it towards the girl, who looked at it, then at Therese, and finally spoke. I thought I was the only one. Her voice was raw and dry, like someone who had not dared to use it in years. Therese nodded, then softly replied, You're not.
That moment marked a beginning, not of a mere friendship or a new home, but of something far older and deeper, a lineage of broken silences. The girl's name was Mirelle, and she had escaped a sanctuary, the term now used for orphanages, though the rules remained identical: silence, shame, service. She had been punished for daring to ask about the girls who left and never returned, her curiosity deemed hysteria. Her head shaved, her food withheld, and curiosity condemned as a sin. And so she ran, a flight Therese understood perfectly.
Therese sought no details, for she understood that sometimes pain transcends the need for translation. They resided in the abandoned chapel for 3 months, repairing the roof with branches, using broken icons for firewood, and planting herbs where the pews once stood. Mirelle slowly began to laugh again. Not often, but enough. And Therese, in turn, began to write once more. Not yet full words, but symbols, rituals, and maps of the body's response to silence. They named their new sanctuary Bell Rest, not for the presence of a bell, but because here, finally, silence itself could find repose.
Soon other girls arrived, not many at first, then 2 more, then a mother and her daughter, both having fled their village for daring to speak of forbidden dreams. They brought no money, no tools, only their profound silence and the fervent need to unlearn it. Therese taught them not through spoken words, but through attentive listening. They held rituals at dusk, sitting in a circle, observing an hour of complete silence. Then each was invited to make any sound. Some clapped, some hummed, some screamed, and one girl sobbed so violently she fell asleep mid-cry. No one interrupted her, for the sole rule was that no sound would ever be punished.
Months drifted by like shadows lengthening across cracked stone. Belrest was not a convent, nor a church, nor a place confined by rules inscribed in dust. It was a breath, a pause, a fragile beacon of hope in a world that had forgotten how to truly listen. Therese observed the girls transform. Their shoulders relaxed, their eyes ceased darting like frightened birds, and their lips found words, sometimes broken, sometimes sharp, sometimes soft as moss. One evening, as the sun bled behind the mountains, Mirelle stood at the clearing's edge, holding a small rusty bell, one that had belonged to the chapel. She looked from the bell to Therese, then, without a word, rang it once. The sound was hollow, a mere whisper, yet it marked a beginning. The other girls turned towards the sound, their faces bathed in twilight, and began to ring their own bells, some wooden, some iron, some tin. Each peal was a voice, a story, a resolute refusal to remain silent any longer. Far below, in the valley, the convent bell tower collapsed, stone by stone, crumbling and forgotten. But Belrest ran on, its sound not a warning or a death sentence, but a song, a hymn for the lost, for the silenced, for the women who had dared to speak.
Thérèse, now older, her hair streaked with silver, stood among them. She spoke little, yet when she did, her voice resonated with the weight of centuries. She recounted the tale of the bells that tolled for those who had perished in silence, of the sister who rang them, of the vow that shackled voices, and of the pivotal moment when she chose to utter "no," and the profound cost of that decision. The girls listened, not as children or novices, but as survivors, understanding that sometimes survival is measured not in years or battles, but in the profound courage to shatter a silence that has endured for far too long.
And so the story of the bell persists, not enshrined in stone or books, but in the brave, fragile, unyielding sound of voices rising from the darkness. For no one rang the bell, yet it rang nonetheless.
The years unfolded like the worn pages of a forgotten book, and Belrest expanded, not in physical structures or population, but in the richness of its stories. Each voice that dared to break the silence wove itself into the delicate tapestry of shared memory. Thérèse observed the girls mature into women, bearing the scars of their past, but also radiating the light of their reclaimed voices. She often contemplated the bell tower, now reduced to rubble and silence, musing on the fitting irony that the very structure once summoning death had crumbled beneath the burgeoning wheat of life.
However, the world beyond the forest proved less benevolent. News, though slow, eventually spread. Whispers of a place where women spoke freely and silence was broken reached ears both curious and fearful. One winter night, a group of cloaked figures arrived, identifying themselves as emissaries of the church. Their eyes were sharp, their intentions colder, as they sought to silence Belrest and rebind the voices once more. Thérèse stood before them, her voice unwavering despite the decades of enforced silence. "You cannot silence what you have never truly heard," she declared. They scoffed, threatened, and tried. But Belrest had transformed. The women of Belrest were no longer children to be coerced into silence. They were many voices, strong and united. The bell that never was became a potent symbol not of punishment, but of fierce resistance. In the face of fear, they chose sound. In the shadow of death, they chose life. Thérèse then fully grasped that silence is where stories perish, and that stories, once uttered, possess the power to shatter walls, break curses, and heal wounds older than time. Her final act was simple. She gathered the women and led them to the ruins of the old convent. Together they raised their voices, not in prayer, but in song. The song was imperfect, raw and broken, yet it was undeniably theirs, and it resonated across the mountains. No one rang the bell, yet it rang nonetheless, for silence, no matter how profound, cannot contain the sound of a single voice or the reverberating echo of many.
Time, an ever-silent witness, drifted by like falling snow, blanketing both old wounds and new growth. Belrest transformed into legend, whispered in villages, concealed within prayers, a secret guarded not by shame, but for protection. Thérèse, now a woman bearing the marks of both sorrow and strength, sat beneath ancient cedars, her fingers tracing the scars along her arms. She reflected on every sister who had come before, every shattered silence, every bell that never tolled. Deep in her bones she knew the truth. Freedom arises not from the absence of noise, but from the courage to create sound when silence is demanded.
As your pillow softens and the night deepens, remember the voices that broke through stone and fear, and sleep well beyond the silence.